You're dead to me, Mom. If you disappeared tomorrow, I wouldn't even attend your funeral. My son's words landed harder than any slap ever could. The restaurant suddenly felt too quiet, too bright, too small. For a moment, I honestly thought I had misheard him. At 68 years old, after raising him mostly by myself, after working double shifts for years so he could attend college without crushing debt, I stared across the dinner table and waited for him to smile, to laugh, to tell me it was some terrible joke. He didn't. Neither did my daughter-in-law. Vanessa slowly lifted her wine glass. A smile spread across her face. Finally, she said. Someone said it. I felt every eye at the table shift toward me. The waiter, the family seated nearby, even the couple celebrating an anniversary at the next booth. Everyone had heard. No one spoke. No one looked away. I sat perfectly still. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and tell me what city you're watching from. Sometimes a stranger's kindness reaches farther than family ever does. The steakhouse had been Ethan's choice. A place in downtown Dallas where the lighting was soft and the prices were high. A place successful people liked to be seen. My son had called 2 days earlier. Mom, let's have dinner. Just us. I had been surprised. Pleasantly surprised. Lately, Ethan only called on holidays. Even then, conversations rarely lasted more than a few minutes. Still, he was my son. Hope is stubborn that way. I spent nearly an hour getting ready. I chose a navy blue dress. The same dress I had worn to Ethan's college graduation 20 years ago. Back then, he had wrapped his arms around me and whispered, "We did it, Mom." Not I. We. I remembered that boy every time the man disappointed me. But sitting across from him now, I struggled to recognize him. His expensive watch gleamed beneath the restaurant lights. His tailored jacket probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. His attention never stayed on me for long. Every few seconds, his eyes drifted toward Vanessa as though waiting for approval, as though she was the person whose opinion mattered. Not me. Not anymore. The conversation had started normally enough. Weather, business, traffic. Then Vanessa asked a question. A simple question. The kind that sounds harmless until you realize it isn't. "So, Margaret," she said, cutting into her filet mignon, "have you thought about what happens next?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" She exchanged a quick glance with Ethan. A glance that lasted less than a second. But it was enough. People don't share looks like that unless they've already had the conversation. "We're just talking about the future," she said. Something cold settled in my stomach. Ethan finally leaned back in his chair. His expression was strangely detached, like a businessman preparing to reject a proposal, not a son speaking to his mother. "Mom," he began, "you've been holding on to the past for too long." I blinked. "What?" "The family has changed." "The family?" "Not our family. The family." As though I was no longer part of it. I laughed softly, not because it was funny, because I didn't understand. "What exactly are you trying to say?" Neither answered immediately. Vanessa dabbed her lips with a napkin. Ethan stared into his glass. The silence stretched. Long, heavy, deliberate. Then he finally looked at me. Directly. Maybe for the first time all evening. And that's when he said it. "You're dead to me, Mom." The words hit harder than the sentence that followed. "If you disappeared tomorrow, I wouldn't even attend your funeral." The air left my lungs. I heard someone drop a fork somewhere behind me. A sharp metallic sound. Nobody at our table moved. Vanessa smiled. Actually smiled. Then she raised her glass. "To new beginnings." I looked at my son. Waiting. Begging silently for some sign that he didn't mean it. Some flicker of regret. Some trace of the little boy who used to run into my arms after school. There was nothing. Only indifference. Then he reached beside his chair and slid something across the table. An old family photo album. The one I had spent years putting together. Birthdays. Christmas mornings. Little league games. Graduation pictures. Memories. My life. "Take your junk with you," Ethan said. My fingers tightened around the edge of the table. But I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I simply stood, picked up the album, and walked away. Behind me, I heard Vanessa's voice. Soft. Careless. Cruel. "Now we can finally move forward." Move forward with what? I didn't know. But something in her tone made my heart pound. As if a door had just opened. And something ugly was waiting behind it. 10 minutes later, I sat alone inside my car. The photo album rested on the passenger seat. My hands trembled against the steering wheel. Then my phone vibrated. An email notification appeared on the screen. The subject line made my blood run cold. Regarding Ethan Whitmore's financial guarantees. I stared at it, confused, because I had never guaranteed anything for Ethan. Not recently. Not ever. And deep down, before I even opened the message, I knew my nightmare was only beginning. I didn't open the email that night. I couldn't. Some wounds arrive all at once. Others creep in slowly, like cold water seeping under a locked door. I drove home in silence. The photo album sat beside me on the passenger seat. Every red light felt longer than usual. Every mile felt heavier. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the porch light was still on. I had left it on that morning before meeting Ethan. Back then, I thought I was driving to dinner with my son. Now I wasn't sure I still had one. The house felt different when I stepped inside. Too quiet. Too empty. Too honest. I set the album on the kitchen table and stood there for a long moment. The refrigerator hummed softly. The wall clock ticked. Nothing else. No voices. No laughter. No family. Just me. I made myself a cup of tea even though I didn't want one. For 40 years, tea had been my answer to difficult days. When my husband died 6 years ago. Tea. When I lost my job during the recession. Tea. When Ethan moved away after college. Tea. Some habits become life rafts. I carried the mug into the living room and sat in Harold's old recliner. I still thought of it as his chair. Nobody else ever sat there. The leather was cracked now. The armrests worn smooth from years of use. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I could almost hear his voice. Margaret, don't borrow trouble before it arrives. That was Harold. Steady. Practical. The kind of man who could calm a storm simply by walking into a room. The kind of man Ethan used to admire. Before everything changed. Before Vanessa. I hated myself for thinking that. No mother wants to believe someone stole her child. But sitting alone in that quiet house, I couldn't ignore the memories anymore. The changes hadn't happened overnight. They never do. They happen one conversation at a time. One missed holiday. One canceled visit. One unanswered phone call. Until one day you look around and realize you're standing outside a family you helped build. I finally opened the photo album. The first picture showed Ethan at age 6, missing his 2 front teeth, holding a baseball glove nearly as big as his head. I smiled despite myself. Back then, every scraped knee brought him running to me. Every nightmare ended with him climbing into my bed. Every success was celebrated together. I turned another page. Middle school, high school, college, wedding. The smile slowly disappeared from my face. Because that's where the pattern became impossible to ignore. Vanessa was in every picture after that. And somehow, I was becoming smaller in all of them. Not physically, emotionally. A guest in my own family story. My phone buzzed suddenly. The sound made me jump. For one foolish second, I thought it might be Ethan. An apology. An explanation. Anything. It wasn't. It was my call log notifying me that my attempt to reach him earlier had failed. Blocked. I stared at the screen. Blocked. The word looked unreal. Children block telemarketers. Scammers. Not their mothers. I set the phone down and looked away. But the humiliation lingered. The next morning, I woke up exhausted. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours. The email was still there. Unread. Waiting. I carried my coffee to the kitchen table and opened it. My stomach tightened immediately. The message came from a regional bank. Professional. Formal. Cold. It referenced financial guarantees connected to Ethan Whitmore. Attached were account numbers I didn't recognize. Documents I had never seen. Loans I knew nothing about. I read every line twice. Then a third time. The confusion only grew. Why would a bank contact me? Why would my name appear anywhere near Ethan's business affairs? I had never invested in his company. Never signed anything. Never guaranteed a loan. Never. Yet there it was. Margaret Whitmore. Printed clearly on multiple pages. I felt a chill move through me. Something wasn't right. Something was very wrong. I reached for my phone and called Ethan immediately. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. Again. Nothing. Then a recorded message informed me that the number could not accept calls from my line. Blocked. Still blocked. I sat there staring at the wall, trying to make sense of it. Trying to understand how a son could tell his mother she was dead to him on Tuesday night and block her completely by Wednesday morning. Then another thought hit me. One that made my pulse quicken. What if the dinner wasn't the beginning? What if it was the end? What if Ethan and Vanessa had already been planning something long before that restaurant? Long before those words. Long before that email. The idea refused to leave. I looked back at the documents. The dates. The signatures. The account references. Pieces of a puzzle. Pieces I didn't understand yet. But I knew one thing. People don't hide things unless they have something to lose. And for the first time since leaving that restaurant, fear gave way to something else. Determination. Because whatever Ethan and Vanessa were involved in, it was bigger than a family argument. Much bigger. Then my phone rang. An unknown number. I answered immediately. A nervous male voice spoke quietly. Mrs. Whitmore? Yes. There was a brief pause. The kind people take when they're deciding whether to tell the truth. My name is Daniel. I used to work for your son's company. My heart skipped a beat. And another silence. Then he lowered his voice. Mrs. Whitmore, something is very wrong. I gripped the phone tighter. What do you mean? His next words made the blood drain from my face. Your son borrowed a lot of money. More than anyone knows. And before I could ask another question, he said something even worse. Some of those documents have your name all over them. Some of those documents have your name all over them. After Daniel said those words, neither of us spoke for a few seconds. I could hear office noise in the background. Phones ringing. Printers running. People talking. Normal sounds. Yet nothing about this conversation felt normal. What documents? I finally asked. Daniel hesitated. The hesitation worried me more than his answer. I probably shouldn't be discussing this over the phone. Then why call me? Another pause. Because he knew the answer. Because I knew the answer. Because something had gone terribly wrong. Finally, he sighed. Because I don't think you know what's happening. My stomach tightened. What exactly is happening? I can't explain everything right now. That wasn't the answer I wanted. But it was enough to confirm my fear. There was an everything. And I knew almost none of it. Before hanging up, Daniel gave me an address. A small coffee shop in Plano. Tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. Then he lowered his voice. Mrs. Whitmore, don't tell Ethan we spoke. The line went dead. I sat motionless at my kitchen table. The silence felt heavier than before. The problem was no longer a cruel dinner. No longer a son blocking his mother. This was becoming something else. Something financial. Something secret. Something dangerous. That afternoon, I decided to see Ethan in person. If he wouldn't answer my calls, I'd go directly to him. His company occupied the 4th floor of a modern glass building north of Dallas. I had been there many times before. When he launched the business, I brought homemade cookies for the entire staff. When he signed his first major contract, I attended the celebration dinner. When he won local business awards, I sat in the audience and applauded louder than anyone. Back then, people knew who I was. Back then, I mattered. The receptionist looked up when I entered. She was young, polite, professional. Good afternoon. How may I help you? I'm here to see Ethan Whitmore. Her smile faded almost immediately. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. She typed something into her computer. Read the screen. Then looked back at me. I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore. The way she said my name told me everything. She knew exactly who I was. Mr. Whitmore left specific instructions. I already knew what was coming. Still, hearing it hurt. He has requested that you not be allowed into the office. The words landed like stones. Not be allowed. Not unavailable. Not in a meeting. Not out of town. Banned. I glanced around the lobby. Several employees had stopped pretending not to listen. Their eyes drifted toward me. Then away. Then back again. Pity. I've always hated pity. Humiliation arrives in different forms. Sometimes it's loud. Sometimes it whispers. This one whispered. I understand, I said quietly. The receptionist looked relieved, as though she expected a scene. I gave her none. I turned and walked toward the exit. But before I reached the doors, someone called my name. Softly. Urgently. Mrs. Whitmore. I turned. A man in his 30s stood near the elevators. Dark suit. Nervous expression. I recognized him immediately from company events. Daniel. He looked even more anxious than he had sounded on the phone. We shouldn't talk here, he said. Neither of us stopped walking until we reached the parking garage. Only then did he finally relax enough to speak. What I'm telling you stays between us. I nodded. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. The company has debt problems. I wasn't surprised. The email had already suggested that much. But his next words changed everything. No, not debt problems. He swallowed hard. Massive debt problems. The parking garage suddenly felt colder. How massive? He looked away. As far as I know, several $1 million. For a moment I thought I had misunderstood. Several million. Not thousands. Not hundreds of thousands. Millions. I stared at him. Ethan borrowed that much? Daniel nodded. Over the last few years. Years. The word echoed in my mind. Not months. Years. This had been happening while Ethan smiled through holiday dinners. While Vanessa posted luxury vacation photos online. While they assured everyone that business was thriving. A memory suddenly surfaced. Last Christmas. Vanessa showing off a new imported SUV. The summer before that. Their trip to Italy. Private wine tours. Luxury resorts. Designer. Handbags. At the time, I had simply assumed Ethan was successful. Now I wasn't so sure. Daniel glanced around before speaking again. There are rumors. What kind of rumors? He lowered his voice. That some loans should never have been approved. A chill ran through me. What does that mean? It means paperwork exists that raises questions. Questions, not answers. Questions were worse. Because questions leave room for possibilities. Terrible possibilities. I thought about the documents from the bank. My name. My information. My supposed involvement. Something suddenly clicked into place. A connection. Small. Incomplete. But impossible to ignore. Daniel. His eyes met mine. Have you ever seen documents connected to me personally? The color drained slightly from his face. Not enough for most people to notice. Enough for me. Because mothers learn to read expressions. It's practically a survival skill. Daniel didn't answer immediately. And in that silence, I received my answer. Yes. He had. Finally, he spoke. I've seen your name. My pulse accelerated. Where? Again, hesitation. Again, fear. Then he looked directly at me. And said the words I would replay in my head all night. On loan guarantees. I felt my heart drop. Because I knew with absolute certainty what came next. I had never signed a single one. The sentence followed me all the way home. I repeated it while driving. I repeated it while making dinner. I repeated it while lying awake in bed long after midnight. I had never signed a single one. Yet somehow my name appeared on documents connected to millions of dollars in debt. The situation made no sense. But the more I thought about it, the more another realization began to settle over me. The loans weren't the only problem. The debt wasn't the only betrayal. Something else had been happening for years. Something I had refused to see. That night, I pulled several old photo albums from the bookshelf in my living room. Not because I was looking for evidence. Because I was looking for answers. Sometimes the truth hides in memories long before it appears in documents. I sat beneath a lamp and slowly turned page after page. There was Ethan at age 10, holding a fishing rod beside his father. There he was again at 16, standing proudly beside the used pickup truck Harold, and I had saved months to buy him. Then college, graduation, his first apartment. The early years blurred together. Back then, our family wasn't wealthy, but we were close, very close. Harold used to say that success wasn't measured by money. It was measured by who still answered the phone when life got hard. At the time, Ethan agreed. Or at least I thought he did. I found a photograph from the day he introduced Vanessa to us. She was beautiful, confident, charming, the kind of person who could make an entire room like her within minutes. I remember being relieved. My son seemed happy. That was enough for me. For a while, everything appeared normal. Family dinners, holiday gatherings, weekend visits. But looking back now, I could see small changes beginning to appear. Tiny cracks. The kind nobody notices until the wall collapses. Vanessa often answered questions directed at Ethan. At first it seemed harmless. Then it became routine. Eventually, it became expected. If I asked Ethan about Thanksgiving plans, Vanessa answered. If I asked about work, Vanessa answered. If I asked whether they needed help with anything, Vanessa answered. Slowly, conversations with my son started passing through his wife first. Like a gatekeeper standing between us. At the time, I told myself it was normal. Young couples build their own lives. That's what mothers are supposed to accept. But acceptance and blindness are not the same thing. I kept turning pages. Each photograph felt different now. Not warm. Not comforting. Revealing. I began noticing patterns. The birthdays I wasn't invited to. The vacations I learned about from social media. The family gatherings where everyone seemed informed except me. One memory surfaced clearly. 3 years earlier, Ethan's company had celebrated a major expansion. Everyone attended. Clients, employees, friends. I remember arriving with a congratulatory gift. A framed photograph of Ethan and Harold, father and son. One of my favorite pictures. When I handed it to him, Ethan smiled politely. Politely. Not warmly. Not proudly. Politely. Then Vanessa quietly took the gift and placed it aside. I never saw it displayed anywhere. At the time, I ignored the sting. Now I understood it differently. Another memory followed. Christmas 2 years ago. I had spent days preparing dinner, cooking family recipes Harold loved, decorating the house, wrapping gifts, waiting. Then, just hours before dinner, Vanessa called. We've decided to celebrate at our place instead. No discussion, no invitation, just information. I spent Christmas evening eating leftovers alone. Again, I told myself not to take it personally. Again, I was wrong. The memories kept coming, one after another, like puzzle pieces finally finding their place. What hurt most wasn't a single event. It was the accumulation, the slow erosion, the realization that I had spent years excusing behavior that should never have been excused. By 2 o'clock in the morning, I wasn't looking at photographs anymore. I was staring at the wall, thinking about Harold, thinking about what he would say, thinking about whether he had seen any of this before he died. A painful thought suddenly entered my mind. Maybe he had. Maybe that was why he always insisted on handling the family finances personally. Maybe there were conversations I never knew about, warnings I never heard. The next morning, I decided to visit Harold's attorney, the same attorney who had handled our estate planning years earlier. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Advice, guidance, anything. The meeting lasted less than an hour. But before I left, something unexpected happened. The attorney reviewed several records connected to Harold's estate. Then his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. The same look Daniel had worn in the parking garage. Concern. Margaret, he said carefully. There are a few documents I'd like to examine more closely. My pulse quickened. What kind of documents? He adjusted his glasses. Some recent filings connected to Ethan's business interests. The room suddenly felt very small. What about them? He hesitated, and I had already learned to fear hesitation. Finally, he looked directly at me. There appears to be a company involved that I've never seen mentioned before. A company? He nodded. Then he slid a sheet of paper across the desk. One name sat near the top of the page. A company I had never heard of, but the name listed beneath it made my blood run cold. Vanessa Whitmore. And for the first time, I began to wonder whether my son was hiding something from me, or whether someone had been hiding something from him. That question followed me for days. I wanted to believe Ethan knew exactly what he was doing. In some ways, that would have been easier. A guilty son is painful. A manipulated son is heartbreaking. Because if Ethan had been deceived too, then somewhere beneath all the anger and cruelty was still the boy I had raised. The boy who once trusted me. The boy who once called me whenever something went wrong. I wasn't sure that boy still existed, but I couldn't stop wondering. The following week brought more answers than I wanted, and none of them were good. It started with a local business article. I was drinking coffee at my kitchen table when I saw Ethan's company mentioned online. At first, I felt a small surge of pride. Old habits die hard. No matter what had happened between us, seeing my son's name still caught my attention. Then I read the headline. The article wasn't celebrating growth. It was questioning stability. Several large clients had unexpectedly ended their contracts. Revenue projections had been revised downward. Investors were reportedly concerned. The article remained professional, careful, measured, but the message underneath was clear. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. I read the piece 3 times. Then I closed my laptop. For a long moment, I simply stared out the kitchen window. The oak tree Harold planted 20 years earlier swayed gently in the wind. Life continued. Birds landed on branches. Cars passed by. The world moved forward. Yet somewhere in Dallas, the business Ethan had spent years building was beginning to crack. 2 days later, Daniel called again. His voice sounded worse than before. More tired. More nervous. Mrs. Whitmore, have you seen the news? I have. It's worse inside the company. I felt my stomach tighten. How much worse? He exhaled slowly. People are leaving. Employees. Managers. Clients. The list kept growing. According to Daniel, entire departments were operating under constant uncertainty. Rumors spread through the offices daily. Nobody seemed to know what was true anymore. The only thing everyone agreed on was that cash flow problems were becoming impossible to hide. After the call ended, I sat quietly in my living room. No satisfaction. No celebration. Just sadness. Because despite everything, I never wanted to see Ethan fail. I wanted accountability. Not destruction. A few days later, I received another surprise. This time from social media. Vanessa had posted photographs from a luxury resort in Arizona. Infinity pools, private dinners, designer clothing, perfect smiles, perfect lighting, perfect lies. The timing felt almost surreal. Employees were reportedly worried about their jobs. The company was bleeding money, and Vanessa was posting pictures of champagne beneath desert sunsets. The comments beneath the photos were full of admiration. Beautiful couple, living the dream. Goals. I looked at those pictures for a long time. Then I closed the app. People only show the highlights. They never post the cracks. The following Friday, another business article appeared. This one was harder to ignore. Industry analysts openly questioned whether Ethan's company could survive the year without major restructuring. The situation had moved beyond rumors. Now it was public. That evening, my phone rang. The screen displayed a familiar name. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it. Ethan, my son. The same son who told me I was dead to him. The same son who blocked my number. The same son who banned me from his office. My hand froze above the phone. It continued ringing. I didn't answer. The call eventually stopped. A minute later, another call came. Again, I let it ring. Then a text message appeared. Mom. Just one word. Nothing else. I stared at it for a long time. 6 years earlier, after Harold died, Ethan used to send that word almost every day. Mom. Checking in. Making sure I was okay. Now it felt strangely unfamiliar. A second message appeared. Please call me. I set the phone down without replying. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I enjoyed his discomfort. Because for the first time in years, I needed to think before reacting. For decades, I had rushed to help whenever Ethan needed me. One phone call, one problem, one emergency, and I was there. Immediately. Perhaps that had been my mistake. Perhaps I had taught him that my forgiveness required no effort. That my support was automatic. Guaranteed. Like a utility bill. Always available. No matter how badly he behaved. The phone remained silent for the rest of the evening. Then, just after 10 o'clock, another message arrived. This one was different. Shorter. More urgent. Mom, please. I need your help. I read those words several times. Need your help. Not want. Need. The shift mattered. Because people often discover the value of something only after they've thrown it away. I went to bed without responding. But sleep never came. Shortly after midnight, headlights flashed across my bedroom ceiling. A vehicle had pulled into my driveway. I walked to the window and carefully moved the curtain aside. A black SUV sat outside. The engine remained running. My heartbeat quickened. The driver's door opened. A woman stepped out. Even from a distance, I recognized her immediately. Vanessa. She stood beneath the porch light for several seconds. Alone. No designer smile. No confidence. No audience. Then she slowly walked toward my front door. And for the first time since all of this began, she looked afraid. For the first time since all of this began, Vanessa looked afraid. I stood behind the curtain and watched her from the upstairs window. The woman standing on my porch barely resembled the person I had seen on social media only days earlier. No confident smile. No expensive sunglasses. No carefully staged photographs. Just a frightened woman standing alone beneath a porch light after midnight. The irony wasn't lost on me. Months earlier, if I had shown up unexpectedly at Ethan's house, Vanessa probably wouldn't have opened the door. Now she was standing outside mine, waiting. I didn't move immediately. For nearly a minute, I simply watched. She knocked once, then again, more urgently this time. Finally, I walked downstairs. The hardwood floors creaked beneath my feet. The house felt unusually quiet. Even the old grandfather clock in the hallway seemed louder than normal. When I reached the front door, I opened it only halfway. Vanessa looked relieved the moment she saw me. Margaret. I noticed she didn't call me Mom. She never really had. Not sincerely. Not when it mattered. What do you want? I asked. My voice remained calm. That seemed to surprise her. Perhaps she expected anger, tears, accusations. Instead, I gave her none of those things. She glanced nervously toward the driveway, as though afraid someone might see her there. Can we talk? I looked at the clock behind her. 12:37. Tomorrow. Please. Her voice cracked. That got my attention. Because Vanessa wasn't the type of person who lost control easily. People like her built entire lives around appearances. And appearances were clearly falling apart. I considered closing the door. Part of me wanted to. But curiosity won. After everything that had happened, I wanted answers. So I stepped aside. 5 minutes. She entered quickly. The moment she crossed the threshold, I noticed something else. She looked exhausted. Dark circles beneath her eyes. Tension in her shoulders. Hands trembling slightly. Fear leaves fingerprints if you know where to look. I led her into the kitchen. Neither of us sat immediately. For several seconds, she simply stood there, looking around the room, looking at family photographs, looking at memories. Maybe for the first time. Finally, she spoke. The bank is taking everything. Straight to the point. No small talk. No excuses. I folded my arms. What does that have to do with me? Her eyes lowered. The silence answered before she did. Everything. Apparently everything. They've frozen accounts. She swallowed. More accounts than we expected. We. Not Ethan. We. I noticed that word immediately. The company. The debt. The accounts. Vanessa kept speaking as if she were directly involved. Not merely the wife of someone involved. Directly involved. The realization settled heavily inside me. How much trouble are you in? I asked. She laughed once. A bitter laugh. The kind people make when reality becomes impossible to hide. A lot. Not an answer, but an honest one. For the first time in years, honesty seemed to be slipping through her carefully controlled image. I remained silent. Eventually, people fill silence with truth. Vanessa proved that rule once again. Ethan doesn't know everything. That statement immediately caught my attention. What doesn't he know? Her eyes widened slightly, as though she regretted saying it. Too late. The words were already in the room. What doesn't Ethan know? I repeated. Vanessa looked toward the window. Anywhere except at me. Then she whispered something I never expected to hear. I was trying to protect him. Protect him. The phrase sounded absurd. Almost insulting. Because every disaster surrounding us seemed connected to her. Yet part of me sensed she genuinely believed it. People justify terrible decisions when they convince themselves they're helping someone they love. What did you do? I asked quietly. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she opened her handbag. A thick folder appeared. My heartbeat quickened immediately. Documents. Paperwork. Evidence. Whatever she had come to say tonight was inside that folder. Vanessa placed it carefully on the kitchen table. But she didn't let go. Her fingers remained pressed against the cover, almost as if releasing it would make everything real. What is it? I asked. She looked at me. For the first time that evening, directly. No arrogance. No manipulation. Only fear. If I give you this. Her voice faltered. Everything changes. The kitchen suddenly felt colder. I glanced at the folder. Then back at her. What is inside? Tears appeared in her eyes. Actual tears. Not dramatic. Not performative. Exhausted. Defeated. The tears of someone who had finally run out of places to hide. When she spoke again, her voice barely rose above a whisper. Proof. My pulse accelerated. Proof of what? She looked down at the folder, then closed her eyes, as though even saying the words hurt. When she finally answered, the room seemed to stop moving. Proof that some of those signatures weren't signed by you. The world went silent. Every suspicion, every fear, every question suddenly pointed toward one terrible possibility. I stared at her, unable to speak, unable to look away. Vanessa slowly removed her hand from the folder. And for the first time since she arrived, I noticed she was shaking. Not because she feared the bank, not because she feared losing money, because she feared what would happen after I opened that file. And deep down, before I even touched the folder, I already knew why. Someone had forged my name. The only question left was who. After Vanessa left that night, I didn't sleep. Not even for a minute. The folder remained on my kitchen table until dawn. I must have walked past it 20 times. Every time I looked at it, my chest tightened. Part of me wanted to open it immediately. Part of me was afraid of what I would find. Because once the truth is known, it can't be unknown. By sunrise, I finally sat down and began reading. Page after page. Signature blocks. Loan documents. Financial agreements. Corporate records. The deeper I went, the worse it became. My name appeared repeatedly. Not once. Not twice. Again and again. The signatures looked convincing. At first glance, most people would never question them. But I knew my own handwriting. I knew my own signature. These weren't mine. Some were close. Others weren't even good copies. Yet somehow they had been accepted, approved, processed. Millions of dollars had moved through paperwork connected to my identity. The realization made me feel physically ill. By mid-morning, I had already called Harold's attorney. He agreed to review everything. Immediately. That alone told me how serious the situation had become. Then the waiting began. Waiting is its own kind of torture. Hours passed slowly. Every phone notification made me jump. Every unfamiliar number made my pulse quicken. Around 3 in the afternoon, another message arrived from Ethan. Mom, please, can we talk? I stared at the screen. 3 simple words. Can we talk? It amazed me how different those words felt now. Weeks earlier, I would have answered instantly. Now I simply set the phone aside. No reply. Not yet. Because for years, conversations had happened on Ethan's terms. When he wanted something. When he needed something. When it benefited him. For once, the timing would be mine. That evening, dark clouds gathered over Dallas. Rain began falling shortly after sunset. Steady. Cold. Relentless. I was sitting in the living room when headlights appeared once again outside my house. This time I didn't need to look twice. I knew. Something about the way the vehicle stopped. The hesitation before the door opened. The feeling in my stomach. I walked toward the front window. And there he was. Ethan. Standing alone in the rain. For a moment, I simply stared. The last time I had seen him, he sat comfortably inside an expensive restaurant, telling me I was dead to him. Now he looked very different. His shoulders were slumped. His face looked older. More tired. More human. Success hides many flaws. Failure reveals them. He approached the porch slowly, then knocked. Once. Twice. 3 times. I didn't answer. Not immediately. Instead, I stood quietly behind the door, listening, waiting. 20 minutes passed. He stayed. Rain soaked through his jacket. His hair clung to his forehead. Still he stayed. Finally, I opened the door. Neither of us spoke right away. We simply looked at each other, mother and son, separated by far more than distance. Mom. His voice sounded rough. I stepped aside. He entered. Water dripped onto the hardwood floor. I didn't offer a towel. I didn't offer coffee. I didn't offer comfort. Some lessons arrive late, but they still arrive. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table. The same table where Vanessa had left the folder. The same table where I had learned the truth. Ethan looked exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. The kind of exhaustion that comes when your life begins collapsing faster than you can stop it. Finally, he spoke. I need your help. There it was. Not an apology. Not an explanation. A request. I wasn't surprised. I folded my hands calmly. Why? His eyes lowered. The silence stretched. Long enough to become uncomfortable. Then he sighed. The company is falling apart. I said nothing. The banks are demanding answers. Still nothing. People are leaving. Nothing. The quiet forced him to keep talking. And for the first time in years, Ethan seemed unable to hide behind confidence. I don't know what to do. Those words hurt more than I expected, because they sounded familiar. Like the boy who once asked for help with homework. The teenager who called when his car broke down. The young man who needed advice after his first major mistake. For a moment, I almost forgot everything. Then I remembered the restaurant. You're dead to me. The words returned instantly. Cold. Sharp. Permanent. I reached beside me and pulled the folder onto the table. Ethan frowned. What is that? I slid it toward him. His eyes followed it nervously. Read page 7. Confusion crossed his face. But he opened it. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. The color gradually drained from his face. Then he reached page 7. Everything changed. His eyes widened. His breathing stopped. For several seconds, he simply stared, reading, rereading, trying to understand what he was seeing. Finally, he looked up. The shock on his face was impossible to fake. What is this? His voice barely worked. I held his gaze. You tell me. He looked back down, then up again, then back to the document. And in that moment, I realized something important. Something I hadn't fully believed until now. Ethan had expected bad news. He had expected debt. He had expected financial trouble. But he had not expected this. Because staring back at him from page 7 was evidence connected to one forged signature. My signature. And beside it sat information connected to someone he trusted completely. Vanessa. For the first time since entering my house, Ethan looked genuinely terrified. And deep down, I knew he was finally beginning to understand that the biggest threat to his future had never been the banks. It had been sitting beside him all along. The biggest threat to his future had never been the banks. It had been sitting beside him all along. For several seconds, Ethan didn't move. The kitchen remained completely silent. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The grandfather clock in the hallway continued its steady rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. But my son's world had stopped. His eyes remained locked on the document in front of him. Page 7. The signature. The transfers. The records connected to the shell company. And Vanessa's name. Over and over again. Finally, he looked up. His face had gone pale. "What is this?" he asked again. This time his voice sounded smaller. Not angry. Not defensive. Lost. I leaned back in my chair. The same question I've been asking for weeks. Ethan lowered his eyes. He turned another page. Then another. His breathing became uneven. The deeper he read, the worse it became. There were transactions he couldn't explain. Accounts he didn't recognize. Approvals connected to paperwork he never personally reviewed. Vanessa had handled much of the administrative side of the business for years. He had trusted her. Completely. Blindly. And trust, once broken, cuts deeper than betrayal from a stranger ever could. "I don't understand," he whispered. But I could see the truth beginning to settle inside him. Not confusion. Denial. Because understanding would require accepting something painful. The person he trusted most had been lying. The person he defended had been hiding things. The person he chose over everyone else had helped destroy everything he built. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan closed the folder. Slowly, carefully, as if touching it hurt. "When did you find out?" "A few days ago." He nodded, his eyes filled with regret. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind. The kind that arrives when excuses finally run out. Then came the question I never expected him to ask. "Why didn't you tell me?" I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because of the irony. For weeks he had blocked my calls. Ignored my messages. Refused to see me. And now he wanted to know why I hadn't warned him. I held his gaze. "You told me I was dead to you." The words landed between us. Heavy. Unavoidable. Ethan looked away immediately, like he couldn't bear hearing them repeated. But they needed to be said. Some truths deserved to echo. "I know," he whispered. "No." My voice remained calm. "You don't." The room fell silent again. I wasn't trying to punish him. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I simply needed him to understand. Because pain ignored becomes pain repeated. "When your father died," I continued, "I lost my husband." His eyes slowly lifted toward mine. "The day you looked across that restaurant table and said I was dead to you." My throat tightened. For the first time in weeks, emotion finally broke through. "I lost my son." Tears filled Ethan's eyes instantly. Real tears. Not for the company. Not for the money. Not for the investigation. For us. For what he had destroyed. For what he had almost thrown away forever. "I'm sorry, Mom." 3 words. Words I had wanted to hear for a very long time. Yet hearing them didn't magically erase everything. Some wounds heal. Others leave scars. The apology mattered. But it couldn't rewrite history. Ethan covered his face with his hands. For a moment, he looked less like a 42-year-old businessman and more like the frightened little boy who used to crawl into my lap after nightmares. "I don't know how things got this bad." I believed him. Not because he was innocent. He wasn't. He had ignored warning signs. Chosen pride. Chosen distance. Chosen the wrong people. But I finally understood something. Ethan had not created every problem. He had simply refused to see them. And sometimes blindness carries its own consequences. Over the following months, the truth continued coming out. Investigations expanded. Lawyers became involved. Financial records were reviewed. Vanessa eventually left. Not dramatically. Not with a fight. Just quietly. The marriage ended the same way trust does. One crack at a time. The company survived. Barely. Many difficult decisions had to be made. Assets were sold. Debt was restructured. Years of rebuilding followed. And yes, I helped. Not because Ethan deserved rescue. Because he was still my son. Mothers understand a painful truth. Love and accountability can exist in the same room. Helping him didn't mean excusing him. It meant giving him one final chance to become better than his worst mistake. Our relationship didn't return to what it once was. Some stories don't end that way. Real life rarely does. But something new began. Something honest. Something earned. Months later, Ethan came to visit on a quiet Sunday afternoon. No crisis. No emergency. No request. Just a visit. We sat on the porch together watching the sunset. For a while neither of us spoke. Then he finally said something that stayed with me. "I spent years thinking success meant not needing anyone." I smiled sadly. "And now?" He looked toward the horizon. Now I think success means knowing who stayed when you didn't deserve it. For the first time in a very long while, peace settled between us. Not perfection, peace. And sometimes that's enough. Because in the end, my son did need my help. But the company was never what truly needed saving. The money wasn't what mattered. The business wasn't what mattered. The relationship was. And by the time he finally came back to my door, soaked by rain and broken by consequences, he discovered something I had known all along. The most valuable thing he nearly lost was never the company. It was the mother who loved him even after he buried her with his words.